So you're wondering if Losi shocks are worth it? That's a great question. Let's find out. As the car falls, the suspension stays fully extended, with oil-filled shocks ready to absorb the impact. These shocks are designed to absorb how quickly the suspension compresses. The silicon inside flows through small openings in the pistons, creating resistance. This slows down the movement, preventing the chassis from bottoming out too hard, and ensuring the truck lands smoothly. Cool, right? Here's another cool example of the shocks in action. As the TRX-M slowly drives off this rock, notice how the rear shocks extend to keep the tires in contact with the surface. This extension is critical for maintaining traction and stability. The oil-filled shocks control the rate of movement, allowing the suspension to smoothly adapt to uneven terrain without bouncing or losing control. If you look closely, you can see it was close to falling forward, but the shocks stopped it by extending, allowing it to gain grip with the rock. Okay, now before you go order these shocks online, it's important for you to keep this in mind. While oil-filled shocks are awesome, there are some cons. Adjustments will be needed in order to use these shocks. For this build, I used shock keys, which allow for custom shock placement, enhancing performance for this setup. Here are 4 disadvantages when using oil-filled shocks. Number 1. Over time, the oil can leak or degrade, requiring regular checks and refills. Number 3. Oil-filled shocks are more expensive than normal friction and spring shocks, both up front and in terms of replacement parts. Number 4. They can add more weight compared to similar suspension systems, slightly affecting the battery life or performance in very lightweight builds. Okay, now with all of that out of the way, here are some of the advantages and why I chose the oil-filled shocks for this build. Some of the main reasons I got these shocks were because due to them being longer, they allowed the wheels to stay in touch with the ground on uneven terrains, improving grip and control. Number 3. You can adjust the oil weight or stiffness to suit different terrains. Number 4. Properly maintained oil-filled shocks can handle tough conditions. Okay, now that you know the pros and cons of oil-filled shocks, you might be asking yourself, what is the difference between oil-filled shocks and normal spring shocks? That's another great question. Let me start by explaining how they work. Oil-filled shocks use oil and a piston to dampen suspension movement, controlling the speed of compression and rebound, without any fluid damping, making them less controlled. Oil-filled shocks provide smoother, more controlled suspension movement. They also reduce bounce and chassis instability, adapting better to uneven terrain and maintaining traction. While spring shocks are more prone to bouncing since there isn't any damping, they also offer less control during tough terrains or during impacts. Oil-filled shocks are highly adjustable by changing oil weight or springs for different terrains. On the other hand, spring shocks depend mostly on the spring's stiffness. Oil-filled shocks require regular checks for leaks and periodic oil replacement. When compared to spring shocks require less maintenance, with no oil or seals to manage. With all of that said, are the Losi shocks worth it? I think that's a decision for you to take, since it all depends on what your build needs and what you want for it. Do you want shocks that need a little more maintenance compared to spring shocks? Will the Losi shocks affect any part of your build, like the fenders? Will it cause rubbing? Well, that's pretty much it for today. Here's a quick video of my custom TRX-M in action. you.